Hi everyone. Hello. Hello everyone. Can we ask you to all take your seats? We're going to kick it off soon so the live stream can join in as well. So that means the brewers too. So if you guys could come up on stage. Oh, silence. You know hold your piece of paper. Hmm? Oh yeah, I'm mic'd up. No.
Thanks, Clint. You don't even need to taste it.
I only had 2 of them because I didn't even get them for myself.
Aww.
That's it.
Joe, I'm just going to look at you and you can tell me when we're good. We're out in the world. Oh, well, that's awkward. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Science Made Beerable's ExBEERimental Science. Before we kick off, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So we'd like to pay respect to the traditional owners of the lands upon the people whose land this event is being held. And that's the Muwinina people of Nipaluna. And we'd like to ask people at home to take a moment to reflect and pay respects to the people whose lands they are joining us from as well. So we are Matt and Kelsey. We are Science Made Beerable, which is a beer blog that's focused on making the science of brewing more accessible to the public and engaging people with the incredible world of science that is behind it. And tonight, we are absolutely ecstatic to have 4 incredible brewers joining us. So we've got Clint Donohoe from Spotty Dog Brewers. We've got Josh Roberts from Buttons Brewing. We've got Dave Mcgill from Deep South. And we've also got Lindsay Gregg joining us from Stomping Ground. Luckily, she can still join in via Zoom. She was in Melbourne, so unfortunately she couldn't join us live tonight. But it's so great to still have her part of the event. So we pitched them all to basically create an experimental beer. And these are these beers that we'll be exploring tonight. And as we explore these beers and taste these beers, we'll also be exploring the science.
Yeah, so before we get started, I've just got some thank yous to everybody who made the event possible. So I want to thank our sponsors, National Science Week and Hop Products Australia. I also want to thank Shambles, where we're having the live event today, for hosting us. Flair Productions, who are doing the amazing live streaming and all the videography. Brendan Vernice, Audiovisual, for doing the audiovisual. And Hopvine and Still for taking care of all the distribution. So all those people watching from home with their beers, it's all thanks to Hopvine and Still and Andrew from Hopvine and Still. We've also got some amazing volunteers here tonight who are going to be bringing the beers around to you, so you'll get to know them quite well. Thanks to all the at-home viewers that are joining us. We're super excited to have lots of people joining in from all over the mainland. It's nice to have the room full here in Tassie, but we are even more happy to have everyone joining on the live stream as well. Now, just a reminder, anyone at home, you can still join in on the event, so you can send us your questions via the Facebook live stream. So you can just pop it into the comments section and then we'll get sent the questions and we can ask the brewers the questions. Few housekeeping things for the people in the audience today. Fire escapes down the back of the room and back where you came in. Also the bathrooms are back where you came in. We also understand that drinking 4 beers plus potentially you had one at the start of the event is quite a lot for a Wednesday night, so don't feel obliged to open your cans, although obviously it's best to taste them as we're talking about them, but you're more than welcome to keep them closed and take them home, and the live stream will be recorded so you can watch it back at any time. So yeah, I think that's everything.
Oh, and anyone in the audience, we have a roving mic too. So if you want to ask questions, put your hand up. Ollie will come around with the roving mic and you can ask away. So let's get cracking into why we're here, and that's to drink beer. So let's hop into the first beer, which is Spotty Dog's Goza. So this beer was brewed by... no one can hear me over the crack of beers.
Keep it going.
Cacophony of can opening.
So Clint, while we're pouring this beer and opening this beer, could you maybe tell us a bit about yourself and the brewery?
Yeah, so g'day everyone, and at home too. Clem Donohoe from Spotty Dog Brewers. So I guess founder and general body, do a bit of everything. The other brewers, one of the other brewers is actually here. These lights are awesome because I can't see the people who I know will troll me tonight, like Josh and Grace and Ewan. There you are. So this beer was actually sort of a collaboration from a few of the guys who brew in our team. So Grant, who's sitting just over there, it was the first beer he ever brewed with us. So Grant was involved, so round of applause for Grant. But also one of our nerdiest brewers, Justin, sent me a massive document about this beer a few days ago. He's out on a boat in the middle of the ocean protecting our borders. He sent me a huge document and he's like, here's what you should read off. And I was like, you know I'm going to wing this. So Justin, I know you're watching. I'm so sorry. I will try not to murder it. But yeah, you've just cracked our Goza. Pronunciation of the Goza? Goza.
Is it the proper way?
Goose.
Did I know?
I think, it's Australia. You know, put your effort in where you want to. Don't put your effort in where you can't be bothered. But yeah, you want to know a bit about the beer?
Yeah, tell us, why did you decide to brew this beer when we asked you to get experimental?
Yeah, so at Spotty Dog, we're a sort of nomadic brewer, so we're still building our brewery. So we brew actually here at Shambles, and we also brew up at Miners Gold in Beaconsfield. So for this particular beer, got up at sort of 4:45 in the morning, drove up to Miners Gold, had some barley wine for breakfast to sort of pep us up. And then we sort of decided that, Spotty Dog, we rely so heavily on hops all the time and often on fruit in the Gozas we do. Why don't we strip that right back and just use malt and a pretty exciting new yeast? So sort of put the idea out there. Hop Products Australia, who we do love dearly, were generous enough to let us not use hops as the showcase. So thanks to them. And yeah, we sort of brewed the opposite of what we would normally brew, which is a big, brash, hop-heavy beer or a fruit-forward Goza, and went with something very stripped back that's just the taste of, some light malts, salt and yeast.
And it's a good beer. It's a very good beer. So the first thing I kind of noted about this beer is it's sour, obviously.
Yes.
So how do sour yeasts differ compared to the more traditional sac kind of ale yeasts?
I will clarify first, I was really bad at science.
Yep.
And I had a great science teacher, Mr. Oslo, and I just apologise in advance for everything I say.
Too.
Did you?
Did you go to Kingston?
Nah, Huonville.
There you go.
Yeah.
Small world.
Brewing. He was an American guy, loved baseball.
Yeah.
Great dude.
Yeah,
I want to do better for him.
Yeah.
So most of the beers we brew use clean Saccharomyces yeast that don't put off sour elements if we do it properly. Sometimes in a beer, particularly like this, when you're trying to get a lactic acid element into it and bring some sourness in, there's a sort of traditional German technique of Kettle Souring. So introducing lactic acid bacteria through, you'll see brewers adding Yakult into a tank. Yogurt, specific bacteria produce that and then kill that bacteria off before fermenting out with the Saccharomyces to produce alcohol and CO2. What's special about this beer is we've used a heterofermentative yeast instead of a homofermentive yeast. So what it does is instead of us sitting a tank overnight waiting for the lactic acid to build, hit a certain sourness, then boiling that beer the next day, hoping it's at the right level, killing that yeast, getting it into the tank, repitching another yeast. We just put it into the tank and pitch one yeast, and that yeast not only produces lactic acid bacteria, but at the same time produces alcohol and CO2 like a normal yeast would.
Right, so it's all in one.
Yeah, so it's called Philly Sour. It's sort of taking the world by storm a bit. Some people see it as a bit cheating, but it's just a really exciting product. And when we first brewed the very first batch of this in our raspberry gosa, the very heavily fruited raspberry gosa, Stu from Miners Gold, where we brew, said we were tasting it without the fruit, saying how delicious it was, and he's like, yeah, but you could never put it in a can, no one will buy it. And then Matt and, gave us a call and said, can you do a beer for us? And I was like, oh, we definitely can sell that beer now. So any excuse.
Yeah, we're definitely sold. We've got a lot of people enjoying it right now. So I guess that you said how it produces lactic acid. You talked about kettle souring. It's a pretty old style of beer.
Yes.
Very old, actually. So I don't reckon they would have been kettle souring back then. So how does it differ, the kind of methods back then to now, to modern day methods?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very modern interpretation. And the style goes back, I think, over 1,000 years to Germany, to the towns of Leipzig and Gerson, where basically they were producing a wild beer. So they weren't pitching yeast like we were, they were letting it naturally ferment. And their water happened to be, sort of briny and brackish from the river there. I think from maybe some salt mines. And they didn't know why they liked it. But over time, as that beer evolved, brewers in Germany started, rather than doing a spontaneous sort of wild capture, started pitching yeast. And as that evolved over time, Americans took it on, as they do. And Anderson Valley Brewing in the US started producing kettle sours, using similar traditions, but a bit of a modern touch. And that's sort of where that really old, almost dead style took off worldwide. And now, gosas are quite common to see in Australia and the US. So yeah, very traditional style, done in a very untraditional way. Yeah, was the attraction for us.
And you mentioned the salt mines, which means that it would have come from the water. So this kind of leads us into a bit more water chemistry kind of stuff. So the water they would have used would have been salty from the start. It would have been salted the whole way. Nowadays, brewers add salt?
Yeah. So in terms of water chemistry, there's some really great tools for brewers out there who want to delve into that, where you can take a base water, or for example at Shambles, a water profile that comes in, and use calculators and math to determine a target water profile. So I subscribe to the sulfates over chloride gang, so rise up everyone at home. NEPA brewers would be, more chlorides over sulfates. We don't talk about them. But I think Dave in particular will attest that, a nice, super clean, dry, snappy water profile in something like a gosa or a really good lager is sort of what we'd aim for. So for this beer, we do have actual salt going in, so Tasman sea salt, who are a great local producer. Quite a lot of that going in, and that's that very briny taste. But we'll also use specific brewing salts to get a very particular makeup of those elements in the water.
So I guess next question is, when did you add that sea salt, and would that have any impact compared to the traditional goza, which would have had heavily salted from the early stages?
Yeah, I think a lot of the reading on how salt got into gosa is sort of up in the air. Some people, say it was an accident, it was part of the water, but at some stage in the last 800 years, those brewers in Germany started adding more salt, and that addition of that salt doesn't fall under the Reinheitsgebot, so water, hops, yeast, and malt.
Yeah, can you just quickly go over that a little bit more detail, what that is?
That's a very Dave area, I reckon. That's just
so German purity laws of 1515, I think. So water, hops, yeast, and malt is what the Germans still. Any country that's got laws around the way beer should be made is okay with me. But yeah, their deal is that it's water, hops, yeast, and malt, and then anything outside of that is can be sold outside of Germany, but not necessarily inside Germany. So
Just not labelled as a beer, I think.
yeah, and so things like dry hopping as well, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, dry hopping is not considered to be okay because hops need to be used in the boil as far as the Germans are concerned. So
So it sort of suits like the grandfathers of Tassie brewing more than the young guns, perhaps.
yeah.
But basically, that was a respectful comment, by the way.
I'm very old.
Basically, yeah, the beers, the traditional Gerser brewed in Germany doesn't have to adhere to those laws. It's the only thing that doesn't. But at some stage, history suggests that they started adding more salt because it was delicious and it's thirst quenching and it's making your saliva glands sort of pop off and you want to
It makes you
drink
want more beer.
This is a good summer beer, which is why we released it in winter, and that's why we put out stouts in summer, obviously.
Just to be different.
Yeah, but no, we added the Tasman sea salt actually at the very tail end of fermentation because we were worried about how it would affect the yeast health.
Okay.
So it was almost at sort of the beer was finished is when we added it into the tanks.
So is it likely that the yeast cells might have died from too much salt?
They were pretty much done their job. We were starting to get rid of them.
Oh, but I mean, like if you added it earlier. That's
Yeah, we thought there could be a case for that, and it was just one of those things that we weren't willing to experiment on and risk.
fully understandable. I don't know if anyone's realised, but this beer is technically a mid-strength, I guess, 2.8%. So you can drive home after this one. So I guess what drove you to decide to do that? To do a little MIDI?
Yeah, so all of the Gersers we've done so far are really low ABV. So the raspberry is 3% because obviously the raspberries add some sugar which ferments out. Same base beer just without fruit, so 2.8%. To us, like there are some elements of the traditional way that these are brewed that should stay the same, and I think that a 2.8%, pretty dry, super clear. Goes to just drinks really well and super snappy water, so that water chemistry is really playing to that. For me, I think this style done at higher ABV without fruit would be like, for all the non-beer nerds, I'm going to say something that sounds dumb, but it would be a bit flabby, like an Imperial Pilsner. I just don't think there's any point in having a 9% Pilsner.
Yep.
And I feel like this without fruit would be a bit flabby, perhaps. With fruit, at 9%, bit of lactose, bit of vanilla, little smoothie action.
Beer.
Yeah, spotty drop.
You said, so in the raspberry goza, this is getting off top, this is not even talking about this beer anymore, but what yeast did you use in that? You didn't use...
Same yeast.
You used Philly Sour.
So yeah, we've used Philly Sour now in a raspberry goza, a blackberry goza, all fruit from Westaway raspberries, and now this beer tonight.
Okay. Next question. I guess just remember, everyone, you can ask questions too. Oh, we've got a question. Let's jump to the audience. Why not? We're just waiting for the microphone to turn on. There we go.
Okay. Yep.
I just had a question about the salt level that you use in a gosa, and could you use something like seawater or brackish water, and could you get like a Bass Strait gosa in the end?
You should work for Lion.
Yeah, that's
Genius.
That's great marketing, and that's a great shirt as well. If anyone wants to appreciate, sorry to the people at home, but it's an amazing shirt. Imagine it being amazing. Yeah, we could totally do that. Beer marketing is often very silly, pointless things. Yeah, we could probably do it. It'd be fun. It sounds like a lot of risk putting Bass Strait into a beer. Like, I don't know, especially around that northwest coast area. It's not for me. But yeah, you could definitely do something like that. We did joke about going and getting our own water and boiling it down and making our own salt. But so many of these little brewing ideas you have over a couple of frothies are just like a bit dumb, and it's just so much more work. Like, there's already so much to do. Yeah, that's a fun idea though. I like that. I might think about that.
But on that, on topic, the Wayward have done recently for Gabs did a blue Powerade beer, and it has recently made its way to Tassie, and I'm not exactly the most accepting person of novelty beers in that kind of respect, and it's absolutely banging, and it's like drinking blue Powerade, and it actually is on that Goza scale. So when you drink that Powerade, you feel that sort of salty brininess, like so from the electrolytes, you know. And so if you look at it that way, like that's where that flavour profile comes into it, and it's the same here in what you see. If everyone's ever been to Bali and drunk Picari Sweat, as well, like, you know, that's that sort of electrolyte brininess that we talk about in those Gozas. So yeah, it's ironic that we spend.
It didn't have to be blue though, did it?
It didn't have to be blue, but
it looks like uni.
Yeah. And I don't know what happens when you have a session on it. What happens when you pee?
It's a Goza, right?
It is. And I actually reckon it's got legs. All right, it's a really solid beer. Like,
Replay Bar in Hobart have it on tap.
And the Whaler, I think, had it as well.
Whaler.
Hasn't one of the Queensland breweries done something with seawater?
Probably.
Pretty sure.
Pretty
I saw
good
that
idea.
somewhere. Yeah.
Sounds like great marketing.
Pretty sure
We'll
one
cross
of
that
them
one off the
up on the coast
list
up there did one.
Not Tassie seawater though.
No, that's completely different.
Yeah.
Just going back to that, I'm just going to keep talking about the blue beer, even though we're not drinking the blue beer. I'm pretty sure it's a crazy method too, where these blueberries, and you think, oh, okay, that's how they got the blue, but then they centrifuge it and put it through a filter to get rid of all the colour, and then put blue colouring in.
Yeah.
So it's really cool process. And, you know, beer's getting crazy.
Beer is science.
Yeah, science. Science made beerable. So this is most beers. We talked about this before. Sac Yeast, Saccharomyces. This beer is Philly Sour, which is actually not a Saccharomyces yeast at all. It's so Saccharomyces, just to go into Linnaeus kind of species kind of stuff. So Saccharomyces is the genus part of the word, and then Cerevisiae is the specific epithet, so the species part of it. So there's many species within a genera. And this beer, this Philly Sour, the yeast, is a. Now I meant to look this up before tonight, and now
same.
Here on stage, I think it's like Lancia or something, species of yeast.
Oh yeah, is that Ryan?
Lachenko?
Yeah, of course it's Ryan.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
So, you know, it's a unique genera of yeast, which doesn't happen that often. Do you think that's going to happen more often in beer? Are we going to see people trying to find new flavours by using these obscure yeasts, but like selecting for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably the biggest hype markets in beer at the moment, besides barrel-aged stouts, is yeast base, not hops anymore. Like hops are part of the equation, but if you think about the beers that are exciting people right now, Mountain Culture, Deeds, Mr. Banks, they're all very hop-forward beers, but the way they're getting those Nipah mouthfeels, and Fox Friday locally, the way they're getting that I guess, set up for the hops to shine is through the yeast. So I think the yeast is more important in that setting, and you know, specifically chasing out those yeast for it. I think things like Philly Sour is probably going to make everyone think, like, what else could we do with yeast? Because kettle souring is a massive bastard of a process. It's full of stress.
Yeah.
Philly souring is quite straightforward. It's very nice. Brewers like it. It's very clean. There's less risk.
I guess it's more like traditional pitching of yeast. You're adding it.
Yeah, it feels very natural. I think yeast, and particularly in like the wild area, and like Josh might talk a bit about some different stuff about that later. But I think just using a standard West Coast ale yeast is fine for 95% of beer, but the really exciting stuff that's coming is probably coming from yeast.
Thanks.
You mentioned at the start that you think some people view Philly Sour yeast as cheating. Is that because, well, is the Philly Sour yeast engineered in some way to produce lactic acid, or been selected in some ways, not just like a wild cultivar that they've found and started using? Or
That is a great question that wasn't in my notes. So Justin can cut the first cut in his arm while he's watching.
You should have brought the page with you.
Yeah, I think from memory it has been engineered specifically. I think it feels like cheating because kettle souring is so hard.
Okay.
But kettle souring is cheating too if you're really going to go down.
Well, yeah, if you're really going to get super pure.
Yeah. You should inoculate technically.
So I think one of the most impressive beers on a large scale of the last 5 years is the Killer Queen from Stone and Wood, where they did a huge batch of beer because Stone and Wood do massive amounts of beer, and rather than adding a yeast to bring in that lactic acid or yogurt, they actually did use grains like a traditional brewer would, which is to throw a handful of grains into the mash, and that was probably the most traditional, Berliner Weiss brewed similar style of that salt in Australia, and they did it on a mass scale, so it was very impressive. Philly Sour, is it cheating? First time I used it, kind of felt like it was, because it's just so straightforward and clean and natural. But I think as more and more brewers start using it and realise what it can do, and controlling the fermentation temperature can give you different acid profiles and different flavour profiles. So we played a lot with the temperature on this. I think it's a pretty exciting product, and that's why the batch before this, the yeast was sold out all over Australia. I wasn't there on the brew day for this one, and Justin and Stu from Miners Gold had to open 120 homebrew packs to pitch in the tank, and I got several abusive messages and pictures of the packs on the ground because we just had to get it in the tank that day. So I think a lot of brewers around Australia are getting pretty excited about this yeast.
We have a question in the audience, I think. Sorry.
Go after that.
The mic on.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, I think my American's going to show here, but you said Philly Sour about like 30 times now. Does this have any relation to Philadelphia, my home city?
It is. It is. I think, it comes from Philadelphia. So that's why they call it Philly Sour. Go Eagles.
Yeah, Eagles!
Go Eagles.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So I haven't used the Philly Sour before. I've got some to use, but I haven't used it yet.
Smart.
We've done kettle sours before, but my question, with the kettle sour, you can control the pH level. The longer it goes, the lower the pH goes.
Yep.
With this one, is it just a set?
No, so
control it?
you can still control it, but it's temperature controlled, so it is a little bit like experiment around with it. So this ferment, for example, was at 24 degrees, which got down to, I'm going to remember the number now, 3.1 really quick. But you can go like between 18 and 22 and keep that pH higher. So you have some control, but it's not quite the same as, so in a traditional kettle sour, once you hit that pH level, you would bring that tank of wort up to a boil to kill that lactic acid bacteria before pitching your sac, which would then produce alcohol and CO2. The Philly Sour, to an extent, is out of your control. But the temps do play a really big part.
Cool.
Perfect.
I think we've got
I've got another question. It's flying in.
This is probably a question for all of the brewers. Is this a one-off, or will we see it again?
I've got 13 kegs of it, so you better like it. The whole reason for brewing this beer, aside from the joke on the can about not being able to sell it, was I think this is super suited to a hot Australian summer. I know it's winter, but I think this beer is very much suited to like the Australian lifestyle and drinking culture because it is low ABV. And sometimes, if you want to go to a barbecue or something on a hot day, like I feel like this would be really thirst quenching. So I'd like to put this in cans all the time, especially through summer. What about you guys?
Well, ours is a wild ferment, so it's probably each batch
Don't
is
give too
going
much
to be
away just yet.
quite different. Well, it's hard to exactly replicate that, but yes, we will be doing more of what we're doing in the future, next grape harvest.
Mine's a legit one-off in its current form. Yeah, I wouldn't not use the product again, but in the way it exists right now, it's definitely a one-off. Yeah.
Lindsay? Oh, we haven't got Lindsay. 1 second. It's the Zoom. It's the terrors of Zoom. Oh, we got you.
Hello. Hello.
There we go. Hey.
My face is red, but it's just because there's a heater on me. But it's quite nice in this very cold, empty beer hall. Yeah, ours is one in a series. So we've done a biotransformation exploration before. We did it back in February, where we used 2 different yeast strains, same hopping regime, so this is a one-off in the sense that you will not see this repeated, but biotransformation, exploration, it's like a series. There's going to be more.
Awesome.
Yeah, it'll keep you coming back.
So,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, so on that note, we might move on to the next beer in the interest of time. So the next beer we're drinking is Flex by Deep South Brewing, which are Hobart's newest brewery. It's very exciting. And today we have Dave Mcgill from Deep South to talk to us about his American Pale that he's brewed especially for our event. So Dave...
Sorry.
Yeah?
I just want to say, if anyone needs another glass, just try and put your hand up. I mean, I know it's quite hard to finish this many beers, so if you need a glass, just sing out.
So Dave, would you like to introduce yourself, your brewery, and why you brewed this beer for the event?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. So Dave McGill, we opened Deep South 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it was, it's been sort of 18 months to, it's probably the worst kept secret for 18 months for a long period of time. So ex-Brew, a couple of mates and myself. It was their idea, not my idea. I didn't want to open my own brewery, but now I've got one, so we're here. They were very convincing on where we were going to go. So we're just around the corner. We actually brewed this beer here at Shambles. So when I left Brew, Cornell and Ada and that were generous enough to let me brew here for a little while with them and just brew their beers. Because you don't get paid when you own your own business, which no one told me. This beer, when we were approached by these guys, we sort of, the idea, obviously HBA being one of the sponsors, these products that we're sort of seeing now interest me considerably because obviously we use hops and they take up a lot of thought process as a brewer. OJ, who works for HPA, who was the ex-head brewer of Brew, he had a little business called Hop Trial Brewing Company, which sort of did a couple of beers with me at Moo as well. And one of them, we had this tin, and he's like, I've got this tin of like CO2 extract liquid hop stuff, and I want to use it in a beer. And I was like, that's cool. Let's brew 35 heck of it. That'd be awesome. So we brewed 3,500 litres of it. We were standing on the brew house and he had this tin of it and it kind of looks a little bit like a green Vegemite almost. And we both dipped our fingers in it, pre-boil, not post-boil because we're all very clean. And then literally couldn't taste anything for a couple of days afterwards. Like it was full on. And actually the beer was terrible. It was like really astringent bitterness and not very pleasant by any stretch of the imagination. So the products have come a long way since then, and we're probably not going to tip the entire tin in like we did at Brew that time. So yeah, Cornell and I had a chat with Ada as well about how we wanted to showcase these individual products, and we came up with an American Pale Ale, still bigger selling sort of style in the craft beer market at the moment. It was probably the best way to be able to showcase this particular, or this new innovation into these products.
So these products you're talking about are liquid hop products, and they're...
I bought props.
Oh wow, they've got an example. So they're liquid extracts.
Flex. It's actually called Flex, so I'm not smart enough to figure out names. So.
Named after the hop
Yes.
product you've added, yep. And so these are liquid extracts, like a concentrated hop flavour, basically?
Yeah. So, and they're varietal too. So we use them in different parts of the process. Obviously, we use hops in the different part of the process. So we use hops for bittering, and we use hops for the aromatic side of things, and then we use them in the dry hop as well. You can first wort hop if you really want to. So yeah, there's lots of different parts of the process we use them, and we actually have a product for each part of the process.
So we might go back to how a brewer might use a traditional hop product first, and then we can sort of figure out how you've done the method differently.
Yep.
So you're talking about dry hopping, wet hopping, all these different hoppings. Would you mind just going over what they mean and when they're added?
For sure. So there's only certain regions in the world that can grow hops. So they're a perennial plant, so they need sub-zero temperatures to grow again. So certain latitudes in the world, we're lucky in Tassie that we're far enough south to have a very strong hop growing region down here. And so you can use hops that are grown obviously once a year. We're lucky that the Northern Hemisphere has an opposite summer to what we do and an opposite winter, so we get them at both sides of the year depending on where you are. So the first part of the process is we use them for bittering. So obviously when you have things like crystal malt, which is what makes this beer colour, there's a residual sugar in that malt that the yeast can't process, so you're going to end up with some sweetness there. So you need to be able to balance that out with hops. That's normally where the bitterness side of things comes in. So we normally throw them into the boil, and then when they boil, the alpha acids isomerise, which is where we get the bitterness from at the end of the day. That worked really well in mainstream lagers for a really, really long time. And I'm definitely on the spot here because Simon Whittaker's here, who's an absolute guru and a geneticist and all sorts of stuff, so we should direct all questions to him later on down the track. So he works for HBA. So for a long time, we were just seeing hops used for solely bittering in mainstream lagers was basically where it was going to be. That nearly, once this CO2 extract of hops sort of came about, it nearly shut down the hop growing regions because you had to grow a lot less of them because there was a much more, there was a lot higher technology in actually extracting what we needed out of them. The craft beer movement came along, and then we sort of saw the next stage of hopping regimes, which was the aromatic hops. So once we're done with the boil, we have these beautiful hops now that are bred at HBA, that when we throw them into the boil, when it's, well, post-boil, when it's sort of low 90s, high 80 degrees, we get the aromatic side of things. So we get that beautiful passion fruit and, you know, all the other kind of flavour profiles, pine, resin, all that kind of stuff. That's all a byproduct of the hops not actually boiling, so we don't see any of the alpha acids isomerise or flash off. And we're left with that really sort of pungent floral, citrus, passion fruit aromas. And then when we talk about dry hopping, we talk about opening the top of a fermenter and tipping pellets in the top. Or we talk about buying very expensive pieces of equipment that we mash up into a slurry and then blowing it into the top of a fermenter. And what that does is gives us another layer of that aromatic side of things. So it gives us that really pungent sort of floral aromas. But what it also does, and the reason why these products are, it takes up a lot of actual liquid. So a hop pellet is what we normally use, is about 4 cones of a hop flower compressed into 1 pellet. So it's easier to store because they're much smaller. You know, breweries like Sierra Nevada still use dry whole flowers. So, you know, the idea of a big flower bale like of hops is huge, and the storage of that compresses by 25%. So, yeah, it's that's sort of the 3 stages we're using them in.
And so these liquid hop products are sort of the next evolution of that, of concentrating it even further by making it, just getting those alpha acids concentrated.
Yeah, that's right. And also the varietal nature. So, you know, we used Citra and Mosaic in this as well. So that varietal nature is probably the next step in it, because Flex is just a bittering compound regardless of what variety of hop it is, but the Incognito, which is what we've used in the Whirlpool edition, is actually that varietal nature. So you do get the characteristics that you would normally get from a pellet in a liquid form, which is yeah, a massive step.
Is it all liquid?
All liquid,
no pellets.
0 pellets.
And so did you add these liquid hop products? You're mentioning you added them at different stages, and that's because of the different features of these alpha acids, whether they're a bittering acid or a really aromatic acid,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. So we used Flex, which is this one. So this is the bittering one. After we're done with this, if you want to come around and smell them, feel free to.
Smell it.
Yeah, go for it. And then we used Incognito in the Whirlpool. So that was post-boil. And then we used the PHA, which is this one, in the dry hop. So we literally open the top of the fermenter and tip this bad boy in. Yeah.
Sorry, can you send that down here, please?
Yeah.
I'm not a brewer, but
it's
that
ours.
smells.
How did you decide what hop products to use to create?
Because we wanted to create American Pale Ale, we wanted to have a little bit of that bitterness side of things. So we needed a firm bitterness. But we wanted traditional American Pale Ales don't really see Galaxy or, you know, Mosaic, you know, like these sort of saw Cascade, Centennial, you know, those hops that are not cool anymore because they're like 15 years old or something like that.
The best hops.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we just wanted to really create a base beer that showcased the actual products themselves. So we didn't want to complicate it too much, and we just wanted to. I had literally no idea how it was going to turn out, and we sort of erred on the side of caution, I guess, because the last thing we wanted to do was make a beer that wasn't drinkable at the end of the day. And these products are, I see these products moving forward as a process aid, not necessarily as an end result to, they're not going to replace pellets in the near future, I don't think.
Yeah, okay. So you don't think that these are they're probably the future of brewing, but they have to be potentially used in concert with traditional hops?
For sure.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're doing we use the example of Mountain Culture and Deeds and those guys, and their hopping regimes. When we talk about hopping regimes, hops are not cheap, by the way. They're very expensive. They're very expensive to grow. They cost a lot of money. They're probably the most costly thing that we put into the beer. But they also take up liquid in the brew house. So if you've got a very heavily hopped double IPA, you might lose 200 or 300 litres in a 1,200 litre brew house. So all of a sudden you're losing, you know, like significant amount of volume because of just the physical matter of the hop that you can't take into the fermenter. So these products allow you to get that heavily hopped aroma compound without actually taking up the liquid. So for us, when we're brewing a couple of 100,000 litres a year, that's fine. But when you're Stone and Wood and you're brewing 20 million litres a year, if you can save 3% of your volume in the brew house, that becomes 5 or 6 people's jobs. You know, that's a really serious saving on the other side of it. So yeah, it's a significant process aid, I think, as opposed to going to replace anything.
We've got some questions in the audience. I can see them floating around. Well, they're everywhere.
Hello. Oh, yeah.
Hello.
I was just wondering, aside from the storage problem of fresh hops,
Hold up. Oh.
of fresh hop flowers, is there any benefit in taste? Do fresh flowers give something that pellets don't have?
Yeah, like I think the difference between dried flowers and pellets is more up to the brewer than what the consumer will see at the end of the day. So it probably has to do with the amount of hops you add, as opposed to what the final consumer will see. So the pellets are probably a little bit more intense in flavour. So you're probably going to have to use less of them in order to get the desirable result on the beer at the end of the day. Wet hops, you know, when we do wet hops, and HBA have been generous enough, and we've done a lot of wet hop beers with Simon. You know, they're probably 4 times in weight the amount of wet hops that you would use per pellets. So that becomes, you know, like emptying your lauter a tonne and then throwing in 80 or 90 kilos of wet hops in order to get the same result as what you would have done with 10 kilos of pellets or something like that. So yeah, it's more so, I think, on the brewing side of things than what it is for the consumer at the end of the day.
They're not practical either.
They're not practical at all. And they're very fibrous. Hops are really hard to clean. So if you're using them in the brewing process and they go through your heat exchange, we used, shout out to Little Creatures, because without Little Creatures there wouldn't be a craft beer industry in Australia. And they still use whole Cascade flowers from the US, dried flowers. And if you don't have a hop back, which is like a big mesh cage that keeps these things in a certain spot away from your heat exchange. The first time we did it at Brew, when we had the brewery at Mona originally, I think it took us 6 months to get the little flower things out of the heat exchange. Like, it was an absolute nightmare. So you need to be very set up if you're going to use dry whole flowers versus pellets. Yep.
Another question.
I understand that the pellets, of course, come, I'm guessing you grind and compress the flowers to get pellets. How does the flex come about? Does that come from hops? And if so, how does it come about? And maybe you don't know the answer.
Dave, we do have Simon in the audience.
We do have Simon. I did have a chat to Simon. We've got a roving microphone, and it's got to do with CO2 extract and pulling out oils and putting them back together. But this is Simon, everybody. Round of applause, because I feel like I might be blowing sunshine up his ass, but if you like things like Eclipse or Galaxy or anything like that, or beer, there's really only one person that you can thank for that, and that's Simon.
All right.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No. All right. That's coming through okay? Good. I can't claim Galaxy, Dave. That's my predecessor.
Well, but you've kept it alive, mate. You've done
You've done something to it.
So Dave's got 3 different products up there. Okay, so he's got Flex, he's got Incognito, and he's got what's called a PHA. The starting point for each one of those products is a supercritical carbon dioxide extract from hops. So all of the compounds, or maybe not quite all, but a lot of the compounds that deliver flavour into beer, whether they be bittering, aroma, or flavour, will extract from hops under CO2 and pressure. So by dialing up the parameters of that, you can choose to extract just the bittering component, which is Flex. It goes through a post-extraction formulation that I'm not party to, that's commercial IP, to make it flowable. So the guys in the brewery can actually pour it out and measure it and get it into the tank. So you can make a CO2 extract, which basically if it's cold, it sets hard. It's really hard to use. So Flex is a modern take on a CO2 extract for bittering. Incognito is a varietal CO2 extract that has been modulated somewhat to pick up the flavouring components as well. So again, I'm not party to the selective process that they use, and I'm not party to the chemical formulation that they're targeting. So I'm pretty sure there's a pretty high selective pressure in that system put onto monoterpenoids. So things like geraniol and linalool coming through and contributing to the flavour of the beer. I'm not sure about the volatile thiols and what they do in those systems, but Incognito is trying to pick up those varietally representative characters. Okay. In Flex and Incognito, no. We get to the PHAs, and again, the starting point is a CO2 extract that's trying to pull all of the essential oil and the alpha acids across, and they then put that extract through what's called a molecular distillation, which is they can actually dial up what fractions of the essential oils they want to collect, and they have a target. Again, they'll be the monoterpene alcohols predominantly, I would assume. I don't know. I'm not even told. I'm part of this global business, but this is IP they keep very, very close. And then they reformulate that to make it soluble and stable in storage and things like that. So it's got additives other than hop in it for those PHA products. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I do
to have him here.
Touching on what Simon just said then as well, the solubility is one of the key things. Like, it needs to stick, you know, like it's so the solubility is the fact that it needs to carry through into the beer. Like, so that's one of the, we know that when we literally throw a physical hop pellet into the thing, you can watch it explodes and turns into a really fine sort of powder, and we know that's going to be soluble through the process. But when you start to talk about these compounds, you still need to be able to get that, but make it soluble within the beer at different temperatures as well, because obviously we've got things being added just before they hit 100 degrees, and then we've got ones that are being added at 90 degrees, and then we've got ones that are being added at 16 degrees, and you still need to be able to extract those compounds that are going to be beneficial to the beer at the end of the day, but they need to be soluble at different temperatures and different gravities, and yeah, it's well above my pay grade.
So is that's not hop resin? That's not like, you wouldn't term that as a hop oil or a hop resin? It's a different...
Yeah, no, you would definitely consider it to be that, because it is all the oils in the hops, and they are the most volatile compound. So the other thing that's probably worth noting is these are probably more stable than say a pellet or a flour. So I mean, we just opened the Incognito just then, and you know, we brewed this beer quite some time ago, and the Incognito has been open for quite some time, and it still smells really, really good. But if you were to have a bag of pellets that were open for that period of time, it probably wouldn't quite smell that way when you went to use it a month later.
So when you're buying a resinous like beers that say they've got like hop resin, it's not necessarily that. It could be something different.
It might be a bit more of a marketing side of things. You know, if we start talking about big resiny sort of hop things, it might be that we're just talking about big IPAs or something like that. It might be describing the taste as opposed to the material used. Yeah.
I guess a product like that there's no oxygen, is there? That's all liquid. Yeah. Whereas a pellet, you have to keep that oxygen out. Don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Thanks.
Great. Well, I think that was a lot of science, which was awesome. Thank you so much, Simon, for that explanation. We've got lots of questions coming in on the Facebook chat, which we'll get to at the end, so we're not missing you guys. But we're actually going to have a short intermission now, so we can all go and get some water, go to the bathroom, do whatever we need. So we'll be back at 8 o'clock, roughly. So we'll see you back there here shortly. Thanks.
Can we ask? while.
Oh, that's rad. Maybe we can come back to it.
Talk about the snacks though.
Yeah, well, we're talking to Lindsay next.
Yeah, Lindsay up next. Please don't judge me.
Okay. Because I think Lindsay sees us forward.
There, I think. Thank you. Sure, but we're about to start, so thank you.
Waiting for the nod from
Are we on?
Yeah, that's why we brewed Cali.
So if everybody can take
Inspired me.
their seats. If everyone can sit back down.
Hello, everybody.
Are that mics up? Boy, let's step it up. Come on, let's go. Kelsey wants your attention.
Thank you, Clint.
You're welcome.
So hopefully everyone's got the next beer in front of them. If you are missing the next beer, which is Stomping Ground Biotransformation 3, please put your hand up and one of our volunteers will help you out.
It's my turn.
So I'm really excited to have Lindsay Gregg from Stomping Ground join us. So sadly not in person. It would have been awesome to have her here on the panel IRL.
Yeah, I'm still quite distraught about it. I love watching all y'all have conversations and chat to each other. I just wish I could. It's like I'm sitting next to you, but I'm not.
Oh.
Trying. Hi. Thanks for having me virtually.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so I'd love it if you could introduce the beer that you've chosen to contribute to this event. You mentioned earlier that it's a series, one of a series, so if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yep, so biotransformation exploration came about kind of in a place of necessity when we brewed it back in March. We had very limited tank space and we kind of missed on the schedule that we were going to be doing a festival where we needed to make a hoppy beer for it, and that was the hop one at at Fixation, and I can't think of the name of the festival because February feels like 5 years ago.
Resin Fest. Resin Fest.
Resin Fest, thank you. I could have probably just looked at my water bottle wherever it is. Yeah, so we needed to have a beer. We didn't have a lot of space. We just had a 250 liter fermenter open, and then we had one of our 1,000 liter fermenters. So we just decided, we needed 2 beers for this. So we just decided to split wort into both the fermenters, pitch different yeast, US05 and 3470 in that one. Exact same hop regimen, and even though those specific yeast strains don't have biotransformation, the biotransformation enzymes, the flavor differences were really, really shocking and incredible and really awesome to kind of taste and experience. So with this beer, we decided to run with that again. I'm a baby brewer. This is my first production beer, my first production recipe. So I've been in the industry for a long time, but this is like the first thing. So we knew we wanted to do, Lindsay Astorita, the other Lindsay, she's also here. We knew we wanted to do, she does sensory and like research and development, but we knew we wanted to do the same thing that we had done with splitting the wort into 2 different fermenters and pitching different yeasts and seeing how that goes. But because like that was good and it was fun to see, but we thought we'd get even more like technical with it. And we decided to only use 1 hop as well. So just 1 single hop, Eclipse. So really the only difference between the 2 batches was just the yeast, nothing else is muddled. There's no other muddled characters. You're really just seeing the yeast reaction with the hops, which is really cool. So we did make this beer. This beer is the one that used the yeast that does have biotransformative enzymes. This is made with S189, which is a Swiss lager yeast, which is kind of unassuming. Big shout out to Ruth, who was working for Fermentus at the time. She really kind of helped us and guided us on what yeast strains would be the most interesting and fun to use. So we chose S189 because it was a lager, and we fermented another batch with 3470, which is a lager yeast as well. And the differences are really cool. And it's just because of the biotransformative powers in S189.
Yeah, so I think probably a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the flavor in beer can come from the yeasts. You know, we're talking about hops and the flavors that come from hops. And, you know, when you taste a really hoppy beer, that's like pretty much all you're getting. You know, you've got some malt flavors, but there are yeast flavors in there too. And I think this is a really nice example of making the most of what the yeast can do. So you mentioned that you you started with one big batch of wort. And for those who don't know what wort is, I'm just going to break it down, is the sugary liquid that you get from boiling the barley malt with water. And then, so it's the sugar that's going to feed the yeast.
Yeah,
so
it's essentially like you're making a porridge and draining out all of the, like you make a porridge and you just drain out all the water from it, and what's left is, I don't know, porridge water.
Delicious.
Cool. And then, and so you're talking about this term biotransformation, and then the beer is named after it. So would you mind talking us through what biotransformation is?
Yep, so biotransformation is the chemical modification. I have cheat notes for this because I'm so bad at sciencey terms, but I understand it. It's the chemical modification made by an organism on a compound. So what we're specifically talking about with that is yeasts. Yeasts are like a housing unit, and there's a bunch of different things in them, but they have enzymes. And in hops, so you have your alpha acids, your beta acids, and then you have a bunch of essential oils, which a lot of the brewers tonight have kind of touched on that. You have your thiols, your terpenoids. Terpenoids are kind of the ones that are like, what we were specifically looking for was linalool. I'm so sorry. But so, getting sidetracked. So Eclipse has 0.6% linalool, and that only goes from 0 to 1%. So it's on the higher side. What the enzymes in the yeast will do will go to glycosides. And the glycosides are terpenoids that are like, they're a sugar compound and, they're a terpenoid and a sugar molecule. And the enzymes in the yeast will go and split that up and change the terpenoid. Like the terpenoid will suddenly be on its own, so it'll isolate that, and then it changes it. So specifically, it changes linalool, which I believe is citrus, but it changes it to a more of a pine characteristic. So the yeast flavor isn't necessarily what you're getting in the beer. The flavor in the beer is coming from the yeast's interaction with the hops, with the essential oils in the hops, and how it's changing that and kind of transforming it. And also, like glycosides, like terpenoids, wouldn't give you those big aromatics when they're attached, like when they're within a glycoside. But when they're separated, when they're broken away and they're on their own, they really thrive.
Cool. So I guess it's making the most of what yeast do best, which is cleaving sugars for fermentation, and this is like an extra bonus that it's releasing a flavor compound into the beer. So that's really cool.
If you don't want to brew beer after listening to that, like you have no soul, like I want to go brew right now. That's passion. You can't buy that.
So you mentioned you selected Eclipse as your single hop, and that was, I guess, to have the same base beer, so you could do your yeast experiment on top of that. But you mentioned linalool. Was that what you were talking about before? Was a citrusy compound? So
compound. I believe it's citrusy. I feel like I might be wrong on that, but I do know that it transforms into pine.
Yeah. And so did you select Eclipse because it's quite traditional, well, it's classically known for its really citrus-forward mandarin flavors? Is that why you went with Eclipse?
No. I wish. We went with Eclipse because Eclipse was just fun. Like, we were looking at Eclipse and Enigma, I think. Linz and me, and then Colette, who does lab. When we were trying to decide what to put in this beer, and when we finally decided we were just going to do a single hop. The good thing about Eclipse is it's super high in alpha acid, so it's really good bittering hop. So it's good to be used, in your boil, and to get, it's multi-purpose. So it has high alpha acids and it has high beta acids as well, which is more of like your aromas and flavors. So that's why I kind of chose Eclipse. Heard good things about it, and it's really new. And also, thank you so much, HPA, because I think we kind of fell in love with the hop, especially when we were reading the hop profile on it. Lots of like juicy mandarin notes. We just thought it would be really interesting to kind of see this reaction occur.
And so, unfortunately, we don't have the other beer that went along with this pairing or this little experiment. No, it's okay. We only asked you for one.
Sort
of. But can you talk us through what were the differences you noticed, and why do you think they came about?
Yeah, and I would love to, if possible, I want to pull Linz in on this, because Linz does do sensory, and like so much of the research done right now with hops in general, a lot of it, especially in smaller breweries, it has to go through sensory and research and development programs and panels. Sorry, Lindsay, I just threw this on you. This is Lindsay. So Lindsay's ran panels on both of the beers, and she can kind of talk you through some of that, because I think it's pretty exciting, because the difference isn't like not noticeable. The difference is definable. Yeah. And it's definable done on like numbers, statistics.
So we did a description test on both of them, and what we found mostly was S189 was actually it had less flocculation, so it was definitely hazier.
Heaps hazier.
And W3470 had a higher level of flocculation, so it was a lot clearer, just dropped right out. So flocculation just means that the yeast is going to settle at the bottom when it's done doing its thing, and will dictate how hazy a beer is, apart from any clarification methods. And when we did some sensory description tests, panelists definitely noted a higher level of tropical notes in S189. So we had a lot of panelists pinning pineapple, generic tropical, papaya, passion fruit, and then after that would be panelists pinning notes of pine. And then following that was some citrus characters, whereas W3470 had little to no haze, so it dropped out quite clear. It was also a little bit lighter in color, and the top noted characters were mainly citrus, so grapefruit, orange, generic citrus, not dictating which kind.
Citrus essential oils.
Yeah, so kind of like that more punchy kind of American IPA thing. So yeah, that grapefruit kind of note, and then some floral, and then mellow tropical notes as well.
Yeah, so there was a difference, and tasting them side by side, we are fortunate in our very empty beer hall to have both of them on tap. So even though we're not serving them to anyone but ourselves, it's still fun. They've both aged really well. I think I prefer the S189, but everyone's drinking both of them, and everyone knows that, like, you can tell the difference, and I just think that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you've done your own little experiment there. That's so cool. So I think Klimt had a question for you. He's been watching you on the screen while we've been talking about the other beers. It's got some questions about what snacks you're pairing with the beer.
Yeah, not just the
Oh my gosh.
not just the Instagram snacks, because I saw a box of shapes come up at one time. I want to know about that.
So these are, yeah, so this was
Cheeseburger.
the flex. So this was the cheeseburger shapes because I couldn't find cheeseburger twisties today. But in case these didn't work out, I also got burger rings because I was like, just burger party.
I'm coming,
And then I also got just regular cheese twisties because I was like, oh, I can make burger twisties by eating the double cheeseburger shapes and then eating twisties, vice versa. Same. But just in case anyone's wondering, shapes cheeseburger definitely have a stronger charcoal note compared to the twisties that have more of like a pickle and mustard note.
Okay.
Just for future reference.
I think we need to talk. Okay. That's good.
Who says lockdown's
You
not?
want to talk about twisties? Snacks.
We're going to go to a live, on the Facebook Live question, which comes from Emily Speakman. Producer of...
My producer.
Yeah. Who asks why you chose a salty snack. We're going back to the first beer real quick. Why you chose a salty snack to go with a salty beer.
Yeah, well, multiple reasons. But one, I think that, because Lindsay and I both did the snack pairings as well. That's our thing. So salt can cancel out salt, which was, like, it can work, but it didn't work with this, obviously. It kind of heightened it, and I feel like it just became sushi with the seaweed snacks, which was really, really fun. But sometimes when you have two flavors, like smoke and smoke tends to cancel each other out.
Because the rules of pairings are contrast,
complement,
or enhance. Is it?
And yeah, that's. Yeah.
So you can use.
I swear we know this.
Like
Pass
one
the test.
Aspect of the food to enhance an aspect that's there as well in the beverage. If you want to enhance, if that's the route you want to go down, enhance something.
So, and like, for me personally, I like to look at pairings as, well, I always like seeing, like, what can I transform something that's a simple pairing into? Like, that's not what it is. Like, that made me feel like I was eating sushi, which I thought was really fun. Like, with just a little bit of acidity would be like a little citrus on top of the sushi that you're eating. So it's like the sushi without the fish. So very vegan friendly. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
I think we have a question in the audience.
Thanks. I'm going to try and word this as clearly as possible because I'm a little bit confused because I've had a few beers. So I was just wondering, you're talking a lot about the alpha and the beta, but then you were talking about how they react differently with the hop strains, and I think that's what's correct with what you used, but like the S189. Anyway, so I was wondering how the alpha and beta affects the like citrusy or the fruity tastes we get through, because my understanding is that you didn't add passion fruit or papaya or whatever, but those flavors come through. So I was just wondering if that's like literally a chemical reaction change that's happening based on like the alpha picking up first on different temperatures depending on which strain you're using.
Yep, so it's a little bit, so it's not necessarily, so the alpha and beta acids, it is the beta acids, part of the beta acids that are reacting with the yeast. Alpha acids are there for bitterness. Typically when brewers are looking at bittering hops, which this is definitely bitter and dry. Alpha acids rate from, I think, 0 to 20%, and this batch of Eclipse was coming in at like 16.7 or maybe 17. Can't remember, but it's really high on alpha acids. Whereas beta acids are, they are what you're getting as far as aroma. So like when you're looking to dry hop a beer or add your hops, like typically your bittering hops are added during the boil or sometimes whirlpool. And the beta acids are what you're looking, like high beta acids is what you're kind of looking for when you're gonna be doing like a really fragrant dry hop. So like any of these New England IPAs and other things like that, like they're oils, they're essential oils. Not essential oils. Like, don't start putting essential oils into your beer. But yeah, did that answer your question? I'm sorry, can't see you anymore.
So I have a question probably for the whole panel and maybe Simon. So there's a lot of effort going into hop breeding and selecting for these kind of alpha and beta acids that we've been talking about and these different aromatic compounds. But as we're hearing from Lindsay, the yeasts can actually be responsible for a lot of what we're perceiving. And if you don't have potentially this happening in the beer, you're going to miss out on some of that flavour. So, well, I've heard, because I'm a plant scientist, I've heard a lot about the hop breeding sort of process, but is there selection and engineering of yeasts as well? Like, are they looking into...
Like, so, I mean, most of... Hands up if you've ever drunk a mainstream lager from Big Brew. Hands up if you've ever heard of the Second World War. So, Carlsberg Brewery sent most of the yeast strains to Australia because they kind of figured they were going to get bombed, and they did. And so the yeast strains actually survived out of Carlton United Brewery. So, like you talk about Weihenstephan, we talk about yeast strains, and we talk about yeast strains interacting with hops and creating hop flavours is probably cutting edge, and I don't believe that anyone has a really firm grasp on the science behind 100% on how that works, and we have breweries that are groundbreaking in that process at the present time. But if you talk about Weihenstephan's Hefeweizen, like there is no hop in that beer basically, and yet it's a yeast-driven beer, and that beer's been around for 1,000 years. So it's really ironic that we spend millions of dollars trying to replicate beer styles that were created, yeast-driven, that came from breweries and things that we hold on to really tightly before we had stainless steel, before we had microscopes, before we knew what was going on. So I guess that's, for me, where the art and the science in beer really does meld well. And what we talk about with Stomping Ground and this kind of beer, and the alpha and the beta and all that kind of stuff, we don't even know really 100% on how those oils degrade over time. So if you open a bag of hops and 3 weeks later you use that hop in the same beer that you've brewed the same recipe of, and we all really hold on to making sure that beer is the same beer every single time, it may well not be the same beer. If you drink a pint in the sun and 20 minutes later, it's not the same beer that you took outside of the pub. So if your beer sits in a clear bottle, for example, like Corona, there's a reason why it tastes exactly the same every single time, because of the science between the hop oils that they use and the tetra hop and all that kind of stuff, and then also the way in which that beer is brewed. So that's my sort of take on it. It's such a cutting edge, and we deal with hops and the alpha and the beta oils are so volatile that we're never ever going to get a full handle on it, and that's why it's super cool that we get to play around with these kind of beers, because there are people out there asking the questions, and I guess that's what science is. You just kind of ask the questions like, what happens if we do this? Like, what happens if we do that? And it's like the same with the beer and food pairings. It's like, well, I mean, like, I didn't even think about the American Pale Ale with, pickled twisties and stuff like that, but I was speaking last night on 9 News, and I said, it's awesome. Like, that's really, really cool.
So, Lindsay, did you have something to add?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, with the yeast in it, you said it so well, but yeast is like domesticated animals, right? Like, yeast is like your house cat. Cats aren't super domesticated, but yeast is a very well-trained dog and a little bit predictable. Whereas hops, there's still so many things that people are finding out. It's pretty easy as well for breweries to kind of understand what their yeast is doing and look at their yeast under a microscope. Whereas it's not as easy for us to actually understand what has happened to the hops and all the different compounds in the hops, and that takes, that level of equipment is for, the really, really high-end breweries that came up with tetra hops so that their beer wouldn't skunk in the sun. So I think yeast needs to be reined in first, because hops are really just a wild animal.
That's great.
I think the thing, like you saw Lindsay getting super excited about it, and Dave saying the same thing. Like, this biotransformation thing is so on the edge, and like Sapporo in Japan, who not really known for their hops, been like leading a lot of the research. And I think, correct me, Lindsay here, it's like, is it geraniol converts to linalool, or the other way around, is what you were saying?
No, so linalool, so there's geraniol and then linalool. Geraniol converts to like the citronol during biotransformation. Linalool converts to the pine one. I'm sorry.
Help us out here, mate.
What's the pine one?
There's a lot of transformations going on.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not just geraniol.
There's a microphone.
Everyone should go and find the papers from Sapporo, from Kiyoshi Takoi, and have a look at the diagrams he's
Just read the whole thing.
Get ready.
There's 3 or 4 over the last 10 years that are just fantastic. Yeah?
It'll make you never want to brew beer again, but you should.
I don't know about that. If I can jump in on some other stuff on this, from 2 angles. From the hop perspective, there's probably a couple of thousand compounds that, if you shoot hops or their extracts through GCMS or something like that, there's thousands and thousands of individual compounds that you can identify. Of those, there's probably only a couple of hundred or even less than that might ever be potentially flavour active. And that includes things that are precursors or free flavour agents, if you like. So things that you'll directly absorb into beer, or things that will need to be transformed by yeast. So hop is a really, really messy matrix, which is why you see people trying to make extracts, or one of the reasons you see people trying to make extracts. There's a lot of stuff in there that you don't actually need, or at least you think you don't need. The other angle's from the beer. So I think the bittering components, so the alpha acids that get isomerized, they're measured in parts per million in beer. Maybe double digit, like 10s and 20s. If you go to the other end of the beer scale and you look at NEPAs, the sulfur compounds from hop that are subject to biotransformation by yeast, they're flavour active in single-digit parts per billion. So 3-4 parts per billion give you that passion fruit character, or they give you that pineapple character in a NEPA. So the actual measurement of this stuff is really, really borderline. Our ability to detect these things is there, but at those levels, the quantification of them, and then the relationship between that quantity and flavour impact is still, now with the technology we've got, nearly impossible. So it's all in the tasting. It's the brewer's skill, the engineering and the art, and then the tasting.
Sensory.
The sensory, absolutely, yeah.
So important.
And to put that in perspective, a sensory evaluation when we're judging on the International Beer Awards or something, I can sit on a table with Bradford Tetlow from, who's one of the heads of Lion's sort of tasting panel, and he can go, this is 14 parts per trillion, this fault, because my threshold for this fault is 3.5 parts per trillion. Like, and that's what we're talking about. Like, I don't know if anyone knows what a trillion is, but that's a lot. So when you're going down that path, like that's a crazy concept to be able to break down on how you can distinguish those kind of flavours and how broad the spectrum of that really is.
I think, sorry guys, I'm going to have to cut it short because we need to move to this next beer. We could talk about this for hours, but we've got another beer to drink. So everyone, you could grab your little can of Paranormal by Buttons and crack it open, and let's get tasting. So Josh, as we do this, I'm excited about this beer. I'm excited about this beer because for those of you who are joining us from abroad, over in the mainland, this brewery, Buttons, is from my hometown of Ulverston on the northwest coast of Tasmania. So I'm very excited to have a brewery from my own hometown. And Josh, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the brewery?
Yes, no worries. So Josh Roberts from Buttons Brewing in Ulverston on the sunny northwest coast, as I mentioned in the video. Sunshine Coast. So we started in 2017. Started with very small batches. Did a few contract batches through Morrison Brewery in Launceston. Well, pretty much for 2 years to test the market, test the waters, and then we realised we can. There's a market there for our beers, so we purchased our own brewery and set up in Ulverston in 2019. At the same time, or pretty much soon after, we also opened a bar and restaurant in Ulverston on the Leven River, and
Good river.
Good river. Yeah.
Amazing canyon. I've had it a few times.
Leven means life.
Well, I've nearly lost mine a few times.
Where was I? So, yeah, most of what we've produced has gone to that bar. So we've sort of been that sort of brew pub model where everything we've produced we've put through the bar, which has been good. It's been a good chance for us to experiment with a lot of new batches and have that really quick positive feedback. So, we brew a beer, literally 14 days later, we're watching people drink it at the bar and seeing their response and getting their feedback, which has been really good for a lot of experimental beers. The problem with opening a bar in 2019 was we were open for 3 months and we had a COVID lockdown. But that lockdown meant we could experiment even more. And during that lockdown, we tasted a few beers that were basically what we did here, which were beers brewed but fermented on grape wine skins. I think one was from Hop Nation, their site-specific series. Yep. Yeah. Another one was the La Serene, and another one was from Deeds, the Blue Vines. And we just loved them. We just thought they were an excellent combination between beer and wine, and something a bit different that we don't really see too much of in the market. So yeah, we set a goal to try this the following grape harvest, and we have a close contact in Ghost Rock Wines, which are basically near Port Sorell on the northwest coast. So we were able to get skins from them basically straight out of the press. I was there while they were pressing the skins, and then filled up some buckets of the skins, could take them back to the brewery, and then we just piled them into the fermenter, brewed a base wort, and transferred that onto the skins. And when we were thinking about doing this, we didn't really know what we wanted to do. We didn't know whether we wanted to ferment the beer with a known yeast like a Saccharomyces and then rack on to the fruit as like a secondary ferment, or whether we wanted to ferment on the skins, or whether we wanted to barrel age. We were sort of really playing up. We didn't know what we wanted to do, but in the end we fermented on the skins, so no commercial yeast was used. But the interesting thing about this batch was that when we got the skins, we got two varieties. So we got the Pinot Noir skins, but also the Pinot Gris skins. And we did two separate ferments. So we brewed a base wort.
You're right.
Yep.
Just keep going.
Just sounds weird to us.
Okay, cool. So we brewed a base wort, transferred that onto the Pinot Noir skins, and fermented that out. And then we did another brew, and transferred that onto the Pinot Gris skins, and did two separate ferments. And what we realised was that there were two very, very different flavours out of those two ferments, and we'll probably talk about that, the reasons why, with the questions. But what we ended up doing with this one was blending them both together, plus barrel aging. So what you've got now is a a blend between Pinot Noir wild ferment, Pinot Gris wild ferment, barrel aged in ex-Pinot Noir barrels, and then blend it all back together and canned.
By hand.
By hand.
Truly experimental. So I guess you would have tried, obviously, the two beers, the Pinot Noir and the Pinot Gris, before you even put it in the barrels.
Yep.
Like, what did you kind of see when that happened? Like, what was the flavours going on there? Because this is delicious, by the way. Like, this, I really like it.
So they were very different, and the main reasons is because of the source of the grapes. So the Pinot Noir batch we did, we found that when we tasted that, it was really short. It sort of just stopped on the palate. You got a lot of those Pinot Noir flavours and aromas, but then it just sort of stopped. Whereas with the Pinot Gris, you had more complexity through the palate. There was more to it. And the reason for that was because the Pinot Noir skins we used were already fermented. So in the winery, when they harvest their Pinot Noir grapes, they bring them into the winery, and then they ferment all of those grapes to produce the red wine. And then they press those grapes after the ferment. So those grapes basically have little to no sugars left. They're basically all fermented out without commercial wine yeast. That's just what's on the skins. And so we took that away and fermented some wort on that. So what we were picking up from that batch was pretty much just tannin and colour, without any really complexity from the skins. But the Pinot Gris, when they harvest the Pinot Gris grapes in the vineyard, they bring them in and press them straight away, and then that juice goes away and gets fermented. So instead of those grapes being fermented and then pressed, they're pressed straight away. So we got them straight out of the press, still full of sugars, still full of life. And that added complexity to that base wort and that beer.
I guess in that sense, do you think, therefore, a lot of the flavour comes from the Pinot Gris?
I think so, yeah. So I think a lot of the colour and the aroma.
The colour is, Pinot.
Comes from Pinot Noir. But I think a lot of the complexity on the palate comes from the Pinot Gris for sure. Yep.
I guess then, how do you think barrel aging might have impacted, especially in the Pinot Noir barrels? What kind of impact do you think that has on this beer specifically? Yeah, so we decided to put them in barrels for two reasons. One was because we had barrels, and there's no such thing as bad barrel aging. And the other reason was because when we tasted the Pinot Noir ferment, it was a bit sharp, those tannins were a bit sharp, and we just wanted to mellow them out, and we found that it was only in the barrels for about 6 weeks, but that time mellowed out the tannins and just sort of softened the whole thing. Yeah, and I guess that kind of, you said you decided to put it in the barrels to soften the tannins.
Yep.
I mean, that kind of comes back to what are the benefits of barrel aging in general? Like, why do people barrel age? Like often the barrel aged beers are always the most expensive in my in my history of buying beers.
I think that's probably more comes down to the fact that people pay a lot for barrels and they need to get that money back.
Yeah.
Or that the beer that they put in barrels are quite often high ABV and they're just expensive due to the excise tax.
So do you think there's certain beers that do better in barrels? Like, could you put any of these beers in a barrel, or do you think there's certain beers that would do better?
I would put my beer in a barrel.
I would put Dave's or the Stomping Ground beer in a barrel. No.
Not mine either, thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Please don't put this beer in a barrel.
No. I'll like the
I'd put mine on skins.
Yeah.
We actually put some of this on skins.
Yep.
We saved a bit on brew day and chucked it on some skins.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Everyone gets the colour of red wine, yeah? Like the only reason why wine is red because the tannin, when we talk about tannin, it's the colour. And that's why when it's fermented and pressed on skin, it turns red. That when you press a grape, the juice is clear. Like, so the only reason why you get red is because it's on the skin. So that's where
Like a blueberry.
That's what you're talking about.
When I think of tannins, personally, I think of, this might be only relate to Tasmanian people or people who've been to Tasmania, but the rivers on the west coast, full of tannins. And that's why they're that
The West
dirty
Coast. I just love the West Coast.
Well, I'm not talking about the northwest. The northwest has got clear, beautiful leaves. We're talking about the southwest. Yeah, Queenstown, etc. They've got those reddish. They're dirty, actually really clean, but it's just those tannins that are in.
Yep.
It's worth noting that the husk of a barley has tannin as well. So if you were to do the Stomping Ground beer in being a lager, and you were to bugger up the brewing process and maybe stew the grain, the tannin extract from the husk of the barley will give you a perceived bitterness that is not desirable by any stretch of the imagination. So tannin, is what makes your English breakfast tea brown. That's when we talk about tannin.
It's a surprisingly sweet beer, I would say. If you think of wine, some wines are sweeter, but Moscato. But we're not talking about Moscato.
Perceived sweetness.
Yeah, but it's got a sweetness to it. What do you think that comes from? Because
it's not perceived sweetness; it's an actual sweetness. Yep. So it's yeah. No. It's it actually finished a lot sweeter than what it was meant to. It finished about 10:20.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's sweet.
She's sweet.
10:70.
Wet.
Yeah.
Surely
So
you've got double the sugar.
If you get pulled over tonight, just tell the officer, blame it on him. Just say, no, finish at 10:20. Taste the sweet.
So it is actually sweet. It's got residual sugars. The reason behind that, we don't know exactly. I was hoping to...
Arsehole yeast.
Wouldn't it be because you've added sweet, like grape juice, as well as the
Well, there's no juice, no. It's all just skin. Like the skin, when you get the skins out of the press, they're like sultanas, or even drier.
Mm-hmm.
They're really dry. There's no juice at all.
Okay.
The sweetness, we believe, is due to either the usual fermentation temperature and time. They're fermented at 15 degrees. And we believe that the wild yeast that was on the skins might just not have been enough to ferment out that level.
It was just a little snoozy.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. It's a little snoozy. A little tired.
The thing is, it was at 10:20 the whole time it was in barrels. It was at that gravity for 6 weeks. So it's a stable gravity, but it is sweet.
So you weren't worried about it, like you hear horror stories of exploding cans and stuff. Were you worried about that at all?
If it was summer, maybe.
No, because we had a date, really. We knew everyone was going to crack it on the 17th. But so you're saying that you didn't add any brewing yeast whatsoever. So when we talk about that, when we don't add any brewing yeast, normally wild yeast won't convert sugar the same way that you would say Saccharomyces would convert sugar. So that's an interesting, that you got a 6.2% beer. So a Goza traditionally in Germany back in the day would have been a low alcohol beer because the wild yeast probably wouldn't have been able to convert the sugar into alcohol at the end of the day. So that's it's a significant effort to get 6.2% alcohol out of a wild yeast ferment. So
yes, no yeast.
We've got a question in the audience, I think. So,
I was just going to say that the skins were fermenting when we got them. Like when we picked them up, we scooped them into these tubs and brought them back to the brewery. And when you cracked the lid on the tub, it would, it was fermenting skins.
Yeah, and fructose versus complex carbohydrates. So fructose being, grape juice, and so 100% fermentable for any yeast. Whereas brewing, you know, complex carbohydrates, yeast can't break down the sugars. You know, yeast is like a diabetic version of the human. They can't break down complex carbohydrates. So we have to do that in the brewing process. So fructose is 100% fermentable on the other side.
I think that's a really good point actually, because the yeast that were living on the grapes were used to, well, you know, they've evolved to be only having to digest really simple sugars, and so perhaps when you add these lager wort, and they just can't deal with it, and so it remains.
Yep. Yeah. So that's probably where that residual sugar comes from, where the yeast can't process that complex carbohydrate.
I think we have a question from the audience.
So excuse my ignorance here, but when you get grape skins, you just literally chuck them in the wort?
Yeah, so what we did is we literally just put them in the fermenter, and then we brewed our wort as we usually do, boil it in the kettle, transfer it through the heat exchanger into the fermenter, and then just let it go. Wouldn't do it again though. Wouldn't recommend it. Getting grape skins out of 1.5 inch port, as Dale knows. Dale's down there at the back. He scooped it out with a spade. Yeah.
Which part of the process did you add the grape skins? Did you do the wort and then add the grape skins, or did you?
Yeah. So the grape skins were added to the fermenter, dry with nothing in the fermenter, and then we brewed the wort and transferred it into the fermenter.
And is that like took you a day to do the wort, or?
Yeah, like 5-6 hours. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so we need to find a better way to.
They soak up a lot too.
Yeah, they do.
They soak up heaps.
We did with the other batch, the Pinot Gris batch, we did it in IBC, which we thought was a better option, but that was still a pain to get out. Real pain to get out.
It probably leads on to another question I've got, which is, you know, I think this is your kind of first experiment with grape skins.
Yep.
So if you were to do it again, what would you do differently? What's something else you might explore?
Definitely do it again.
Get Dale to do it again. Right?
Make Jimmy can it. Jesus.
We are going to do it again. More volume. We'll barrel age for longer. Try to ferment out those residual sugars. Add a bit more barrel characteristics. And I think that's a great summer beer. So I'd like to do it at the same time of year and release it in summer and keep it in the barrels for a bit longer.
You could do it like Klimt and put it out in winter. I mean,
well, that's stupid. And the other thing I'll change is not put them in the fermenter. We need to come up with a different way to add them. Yeah.
The other thing about adding that kind of stuff is, in a commercial brewery, to add skins. I came from a brewery at Mona where the winemaker was very scared about a brewery being on site because of, I don't know why, actually, to tell you the truth, because winemakers are filthy animals that use all sorts of very scientific tricks to stop ferments and do what they do. So to add a raw product like skins to a commercial brewery where you're also brewing pale ales and lagers and everything that don't require this kind of characteristic is a very bold move. It's and it's not just it shouldn't be sneezed at.
Which might take us on to, I don't know if anyone saw the video where we've released a whole bunch of videos. If you haven't seen them, go back and watch them. But we released them in the lead up to the event, and we focused on canning with Josh and Buttons. But I don't think Josh realised what he might have to do to can this beer. Can you tell us a little bit about the canning process?
Yeah.
And how that changed?
So typically we use a mobile canning crew from Launceston. They come through and do our canning. But their canning machine isn't adapted correctly to allow for wild fermental bacterial products in their system.
Shambles will do it for you.
No, he reckons these He's going to fix it.
You get it?
Yeah. So next canning run, he reckons he'll be right to go.
Cornell's just sitting over there with his mobile canning line, clenching his butt cheeks.
Okay.
Oh, don't you dare ask us.
Can we book in?
Okay.
It's mainly, it's fine to can. It's the cleaning and making sure you're not leaving behind any thing that you don't want to transfer to the next brew. So he wasn't comfortable canning this product, so we had to do it all ourselves, which luckily we have a canning machine, which is very basic, but it's literally just like a one you see at bars where it's like you fill a can off tap and they, like a cannibal sort of thing.
So yeah, we should say that Josh and Dale canned 1,000 cans, one at a time.
Yep, labelled.
And that deserves an applause, I think.
Up until a year ago in Australia, no one had ever canned a beer like this. Like Wildflower and Black Arts were the first people to do it. So a year ago, you were would have been a massive pioneer.
I should say, Josh is still a pioneer though, because growing up on the northwest coast of Tasmania, craft beer is. It's not a big thing up there. I mean, there is 7 Sheds, and I do give credit to 7 Sheds in Railton, but Buttons was one of the first breweries in the northwest coast, and we're getting them popping up all over the show now. So. Got a question online, which we'll jump to, which is about the unpredictability of wild yeasts. Because I'm not going to lie, when you said you wanted to contribute this beer, it could have gone either way. I mean, I was worried, it could be crap, or it could be delicious.
Yep.
And it is delicious, so I'm very happy. But I mean, were you worried about that? And is that risk of undesirable flavours?
Yeah, I wasn't worried. I didn't know what the end product was going to be.
Can you cut me some?
Yeah, like you said, this is the.
Yeah. Sorry, Clint, whispering does not work on these mics.
Just bailed.
Absolute rookie. Absolute rookie.
You'd think after years of doing step brewers, he'd be all over it, but no.
Well, with step brewers, mate, you can actually hit the pause button, but there's no pause button. We're on. He's gone to hang a piss.
Hopefully the mic's not still on.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, it's totally sent off track. Undesirable flavours. Were you worried about this beer?
Yeah, we didn't know what to expect out of this one. We just sort of tasted it during the ferment, and pretty early on we knew it was going to be good.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly clean for what it is for being a wild ferment, but I think that's just due to the time. If we left it in barrels for longer, it'd probably pick up a bit more funk and bits and pieces. But
I'd put my hand up and say it's beer of the night too. By the way, actually, I reckon it's absolutely fucking.
Thanks, man. I'll have to say thanks to Dale as well, assistant brewer. He did plenty of work with that one, so thank you.
Especially on the shovel.
Yeah.
All right, we've got so many online questions that we've not addressed, and we're getting close to the end of the night. So let's just jump to some more generic questions.
None for Clint.
Yeah, well, Clint can't get any at all. There's so many silly questions in here because Facebook is just ridiculous. So there's a question about how the second beer, which was your beer, Dave, and it says about where does the sweetness come from, that kind of honeyish finish, like the honey finish in the beer.
Yeah, that comes from the crystal malt. So what we were talking about you know, about those complex sort of carbohydrates and all that kind of stuff. When you roast barley, so we'll malt, barley's malted, which basically means that a farmer grows it, sends it to somebody who puts it through a couple $100,000 worth of equipment, and they decide whether or not it's going to be a malted grey barley or if it's going to go to be Wheat Bix or something like that. And here he is.
How good's grog?
Yeah.
Love grog.
About you.
But the colour is what gives it that sweetness. So when you roast the barley, you change the structure of the sugar, and the structure of the sugar then becomes unfermentable. So at the end of the day, that sweetness is because the yeast can't eat it later on down the track. So yeah, that's why getting 6.2% out of this kind of beer with wild yeast is exceptional.
Yeah. Another question about the hop extracts. Do you think they'll ever be available? Because I think when we had our radio interview, in like lead up to this event, you talked about how, you know, with homebrewing, it's because it's so great because everything is so accessible. You can have whatever, like the actual big brews, the big boys have, big boys and girls. But will this ever be available to the homebrew market, these kind of hop extracts?
Oh, 100%. The beauty about making beer is that, like, homebrewers especially really drive, because they have a lot of time, because if you are a home brewer and you wait for it.
Shut up, Ewan. Shut up, Ewan.
Don't bugger up a perfectly good hobby by trying to make it your career. Is what I would say. So if you have the time to be brewing at home, then you have the time to be able to do the research and work on these products. And these products will be available 100% because, you know, we've seen the advancements in malt, and we've seen that HBA really look after the homebrew shops around here as well. Yeah. Like, I mean, you can get Eclipse in a homebrew shop, and you can get Mosaic and Citra and Galaxy, and if you literally try to lock those kind of contracts in right now for the next 3 years, it's a really tough situation. So yeah, it's definitely going to be available, and I guess that's where the difference between making wine and making beer is that you don't have to have a 150-year-old vine that's grown in the Rhone region in France in order to make that kind of wine, whereas with beer, you can actually access all those raw materials throughout the world and actually make your own beer. So yeah, I definitely believe that they will be available. You know, you've only got to go to a homebrew shop and see the additives for making spirits, or, you know, I mean, owning your own still not that long ago was illegal. So, you know, it'll definitely be available.
Yeah. All right, so we've gone over time, and we've got a question that's just come in, which is basically the perfect question for wrapping up, which just does our job for us. So we're going to go through the panelists. It's basically what is next for each of these breweries. Clint, I think you've probably got the biggest scoop out of all of them, probably.
Not really.
It's been the longest scoop, let's put it that way.
That's true.
Longer than my scoop.
You managed to get yours built before I could even get mine planned. For us, my wife's having a baby in about 36 hours. So she's super stoked about me being here. Love you. I'm sure she's watching. She hates beer. So that's pretty big. No, Spotty Dog Brewers, we're building a brewery. We've got approval to build a brewery out in Derwent Park. We're just moving the car park from the roof to the underground, and that's apparently is very hard to do. So yeah, we'll be in our own space, late this year, early in the new year, and then opening a tap room. We're brewing a hell of a lot of beer right now, so I'm taking 6 weeks off. Everyone else in the team, thank you, Grant and Justin and the crew at Shambles and Miners are doing everything. Life's good. Life's real good.
It's great. I'm really looking forward to that brewery.
Yeah, same. I'm sick of being asked when it's opening.
So when is it opening?
Yeah, we'll be brewing in there very shortly. So, yeah, good times.
Josh?
Good times.
For us, We've ordered another brewery for our bar and restaurant in Ulverston. So currently we have a brewery in Short Street in Ulverston, which is sort of in the industrial area, plus a bar and restaurant down on the river at the wharf. So we've got a brewery coming for down there as well. So people will be able to experience like this awesome setup at Shambles, be able to see the tanks and see how it's produced, and drink from the tanks. And that'll, not only add that sort of tourist attraction, but also expand our production so that we can probably focus a bit more on wholesale and canning and kegging and getting out to more places like down here.
Dave? I mean, I know you've had the biggest news while you were doing this. Like, we put you under an enormous amount of pressure because we asked you to be part of this while you were trying to open your own brewery and brew pub. But what's next?
I'm just holding on, dude. But, no, our canning line arrives in September. Stout comes out. We're gonna do a stout tomorrow.
A lot of pressure on that beer.
Yeah.
What a scoop!
So, but we're just trying to add to the amazing tapestry that Hobart really has as far as hospo is concerned, and brew pubs. Like, I've been really lucky over the last sort of 15 years to see the industry grow, and the fact that we've got 70 odd people here and 300 people online, and Stomping Ground who have paved the way in a really competitive industry over in Melbourne. The fact that everyone's here is the reason why we're here. So I think, I think I'll just get up tomorrow and keep on doing what we do and make sure that we try and provide something for everybody, because we've gone from Pinot skins to lagers that have got biotransformation to gozers and stuff like that. So it's a good time to be part of the industry, really.
Yeah.
Geez, there's a lot of pressure on that stout.
No, it's like, mate, it's like full Cascade export stout. I fucking love Cascade. It's got nothing to do with the Velvet Sledgehammer. I love Moo Brew Stout for what it is, and shout out to Jack, who probably brewed one of the best versions of it I've seen in 10 years. So it's got nothing to do with that. So there's still probably a fair amount of pressure on it, but.
And Lindsay, what about yourself and the Stomping Ground team?
Hopefully we will come out of lockdown. Yay. Hopefully. So we did just open up a venue at in Morris. Well, it's called Morris Moor, and it's in Moorabbin. So that tried to open up in June, and then there's been some lockdowns since then. But we do have we have a brewery there as well. So one of our brewers is going over there. Hopefully the airport gets back up and running someday. Then I'll eventually move to the airport to be one of the only airport brewers in the world, which is cool. As for Stomping Ground, there's a lot coming up. We've gotten to do a lot more of all brewers are kind of getting to experiment a lot more. We have a really awesome mixed pack coming out that I can't talk about, but we're all really into classical styles and lagers, and we have a small 500-liter research and development kit and 3 different 250-liter fermenters, so we're able to really now, we just got that up and running, and so we're really able to put down a lot of different test batches and really small batches, I don't want to repeat that word, and get them out on the bar and see how people respond to them, which is really exciting. So that's just opening up a lot more creativity for us. So pretty stoked for Stomping Ground as the whole, as long as we come out of lockdown someday.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think that's all we have time for. I think we've actually gone over time, but that's fine. So we've got a bunch of unanswered questions still on the live stream, but we're going to make sure we get any of those questions to the brewers, whoever they're relevant to. Extra homework for you guys. And we will answer them that way, probably. And we'll put them online on our social media so you can get the answers. So again, thank you to our amazing panel. Obviously, we wouldn't be here without these wonderful people brewing these wonderful beers. So thank you so much. And obviously, thank you to everyone who supported our event, all the sponsors, everyone who's pitched in and helped, everyone who's bought a ticket and come along, bought the beers. We will be posting this recorded version of the live stream on our social media, so you can watch it back again. You can also still buy these beers. You've heard how limited they are, but there are still some available at Hop, Vine and Still. So if you really love them, go out, buy them. You can watch the stream again with other friends or whatever and relive the moment, which would be nice. That's what I plan on doing with the amazing snack pairing from Lindsay. So watch this space. But we'd also love any feedback. So please get in touch with us on social media. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're always posting science-based blogs about beer. We try and do some science-twisted beer reviews as well. So it's all kinds of cool things up on there. So yeah, thank you to everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. We definitely should thank these guys too, because and yourselves, because it seems like a very glamorous profession, making beer and doing what you do, but I was literally hosing tanks out 15 minutes. I had to call Matt and tell him that I wasn't going to be here to do a sound check until 6 o'clock because, you know, it is what it is. But these guys do it out of pure love and zero cash. And you guys come along and enjoy it. And we really need to hold on to the fact that if it wasn't for people that take time out of their normal professions, which, you know, they get paid to do, in order to put these events on, then we wouldn't be sitting here and you guys wouldn't be sitting here either. And if it wasn't for you guys to have a level of interest about where your product comes from and whether that's hyper-local or whether or not it's from somewhere else that's really going through a really tough time right now. So, you know, if you can support those kind of breweries that are in lockdown right now, if you see a Victorian or New South Wales beer in package that arrives in Tassie, then maybe have a think about having a crack at it right now, because I can guarantee you they are millions of dollars in the hole and seriously hurting right now with what's going on. So, yeah, no, thanks very much. Yeah.
That's it.
Cheers.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I need to click special. I didn't hear. So fucking bad.
Yeah, I missed that.
Thank you.